today I'm going to be making scones. We're going to do a fruit scone today. You can change that by removing the fruit completely and have plain scones, or you can change what I'm doing as cherries to sultanas. Alternatively, you can change it to a savoury scone. So all you would do is replace the sugar with grated cheese and a teaspoon of English mustard powder as an option as well. So you would take away the quantity of the sultanas or the cherries, which is about 75 grams, and you replace that with 75 grams of cheese. You wouldn't put the sugar in, but you can add that teaspoon of mustard powder instead. So we have got self-raising flour, I've got cherries which I've cut in half, I've also got cold cubed butter, I'll explain why in a second. Very small amount of caster sugar. We add a lot of the sugar comes from the jam that you put onto the scones rather than actually adding them and then being a really sweet product. Milk, which we're binding everything together and also be using as a glaze. And then I've got a little bit of extra flour just for when it's on the work surface and when we are cutting the scones up. We are going to preheat the oven to gas mark 7 to 20, so it's a really high heat today, and that helps get that quick rise on the scones, still cooking them all the way through, and they do cook in 10 to 12 minutes. So I'm just going to preheat the oven now to 220, and we are using a mixing bowl, sieve for the flour, spoon, optional, depending on how much you want to get your hands dirty, and obviously I've got a jug which I've already measured out my milk. The first thing we are going to do is sieve in our self-raising flour. The flour itself has got a raising agent in it, that's the self-raising flour, which means it's already had the raising agents added into it. If you don't have self-raising flour, you can do this recipe with 2 teaspoons of baking powder to the 250 grams of plain flour as an alternative. So once the flour is sieved, we are going to add in the cubed butter, and we're going to do something called a rubbing in technique, and it's a process called shortening, and that allows the scones, instead of having the spongy texture, to have a very slight crumble. Not to the extent of pastry, although the process is the same, but the butter quantity will be higher with pastry, which gives it a lot higher crunch rather than the crumbly texture. So it's got more of a biscuity type texture, same with shortbread. So to rub them in, we need them quite small to allow that process to go through quite quickly without melting the butter. So the butter is fridge temperature, cutting it up small, and if you've got really warm hands, it's often a good idea to run them under some cold water and dry them first, because your body temperature melting the butter will stop that coating process, which I'm going to talk through now. So butter is in with the flour, and I'm going to rub with my fingertips. We don't want to see flour on the palms of our hands. That's where they are really warm. So we don't want to do that. We want to use the fingertips, and we are lifting in between to get air in between it to keep it all cool. And as we're rubbing, you can see I'm using my thumbs and my fingers. So my thumbs are doing a lot of the work, and we just keep rubbing until all of that butter has been combined. Now, on a science aspect, what we're doing is we're coating the flour particles in fat. We're giving them a waterproof coating so that no moisture can get to them, and therefore they can't expand, and that creates the crumbly texture. Now obviously we are not using a lot of butter, so not all of the flour particles will be coated in butter, so some will expand and some won't. So you'll see a crumbly texture, but it will still be soft, it won't be biscuit-like. Now as you're rubbing in, you will think you've rubbed it all in, and you'll think all the butter has gone. Just to make sure, give the bowl a bit of a shake, and you'll notice that some of the butter will come back up to the surface. So we keep rubbing in until all of that is gone, and it will go a very, very slight yellow colour. So instead of being the white, the bleach white of the flour, you will see some of the colour of the butter coming through as it's coating that flour and doing that shortening process that we're going to see once we've cooked our scones. So I've got cherries today. You can put in any sort of fruit, dried fruit like that. So you can put raisins, sultanas. You could even, if you really like the mixed fruit, you could, the mixed peel, you could add in mixed peel as well. If you've got a mixture, put them all in. It's absolutely fine. or alternatively you can just do them plain. Just remember to add the sugar in if you're doing the plain, and as I said before, you've got that savoury option. So I have now rubbed in all of my butter, so I've got no lumps. I've got a bit of a crumbly texture to my flour. So what I'm going to do is add in the sugar, stir that around just with my fingers, and then add in my fruit. So I've chopped my cherries in half, and then just mix those around before we start to add in the milk. The idea with the milk is there should be a small amount left at the end that we can use then to glaze. Obviously, if you've used it all and it's still not stuck together, you can put a bit more in and then use separate milk. So I'm going to add about 2/3 in. My hands are already dirty, so I'm not too bothered. If you don't like mess, then you can use a spoon. And you want to really combine it so that all that milk is absorbed, and that's acting as our glue. That's going to bind the whole pastry, the whole scone mixture together. So once all of that has gone, you will see that it starts to lump together, but you can see still a lot of dry mixture. So we add a little bit more milk, and we keep going until we have a dough. So until all of it can stick together without any dry ingredients being left behind. So now you should be able to start to handle it, to bring it together like so. So this is going to be one large piece that we will then flatten out. Now the idea with a scone is you don't need a lot of equipment with making scones. You don't need a rolling pin because we just use the pressure of our own hands just to slightly flatten it. When you use a rolling pin, there's a tendency to roll it too thin, and then you end up with very flat scones. They don't rise enough because you've not left them thick. So now I've talked my way through that. You can see that I have now got a dough. Got a little bit still on my fingers, but I can squash that in as well. So once you've got to this stage, we're going to add just a little bit of flour to the work surface, just so it doesn't stick, and so that when we are rolling it out and cutting, that it's not sticking to the work surface and it comes up easily. So move my bowl to one side. Little pinch of flour on the work surface, and then we pop that onto here. So what I'm going to do now is go on to a close-up on my hands and looking at this so that you can see the next stages. I have quite a range of cutters just to show you before we flatten this out. This is what we call a batch cutter. So this is for large quantities, and it means that you can cut out 4 at a time without any waste in between. So that's a really good one for someone who's making scones quite a lot or making lots and lots of scones in one time. This is more of your traditional scone cutter. This has got a fluted edge. You can get ones that are just flat as well, but perfect size. You don't want to get too big with scones. You do want the smaller size. If you don't have cutters, a cup is perfect. The only thing I would say is just oil a little bit around the edge just to slide it out, because it can create a little bit of a vacuum. So, but this is perfect. So if you don't have cutters at home, don't use that as a reason not to make them. Have a go. These are things that were made a long time ago, and it's a really old recipe, and the cutters again weren't available. They would find something suitable of a round type shape to use. Again, don't need a rolling pin either. So what we're going to do is just press the mixture down, and you can press it down quite flat. You want it about a centimetre and a half, and then we are going to use the cutters, and we keep putting the mixture back together and cutting and cutting and cutting until it is all used up. We don't want any waste. So regards the batch cutter, I'm going to do it all at once. Press down, bit of a wiggle, remove the extra mixture, and then we have our pieces ready to be put onto a baking tray, which I'll show you in a second. So just keep going with this. I'll do a couple with the other cutter now to show you how easy it is. Again, push down just with your hands, no need for a cutter. And then in, a bit of a twist, making sure it's all broken through. And then we have Now I'm going to cover the baking tray in flour just to create a barrier to stop the scones from sticking. So tiny layer of flour, that's all you need, okay? Then we're going to pop the scones that we have just cut out onto the baking tray. They don't expand widthwise very much, just make sure there is a little gap between them. They are something that's going to rise upwards rather than outwards. Pop them on. Obviously any spare ingredients, waste not, want not, so I've just got a small amount there. It's perfect for a little bit of taste testing when you've made them. And then all I'm going to do now is use the pastry brush and some milk and just brush over the top. This is what we call a glaze, and this gives a nice golden colour to our scones. If you used an egg wash, it would give the golden colour, but it would also add a shine as well. So this gives you a matte finish, whereas an egg wash would give you a shiny finish. Try not to spill it down the sides, as that will then allow the scone to glue itself to the baking tray. So we're just trying to dab it over the top. Once that's done, oven gloves are going to go on, and we're going to pop these into the oven for 10 to 12 minutes. The scones have now been in for 12 minutes, so I'm going to remove them to show you what the finished product looks like. So as you can see, they have risen. See the height of them now? And they've got that lovely golden colour from the glaze. So just a flat spatula, you're just going to loosely remove them and pop them onto a cooling rack, and that will just allow the air to circulate around them so that they cool evenly without being a little bit soggy underneath when the condensation forms. And once these are cooled, still slightly warm, you can serve them just with butter, with jam, with clotted cream, whipped cream, whatever you like. So enjoy the recipe and let me see your creations.